I want to say first and foremost that this is a collaborative project. And we are in the second phase of the development of an immersive virtual reality project in which our goal is to create a template, create a frame where anyone can take what we have produced and go and do likewise. So that's really the goal here. And we are focusing on exploding the walls of the archives that contain manuscripts and eventually perhaps other kinds of complex documents. You know, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, universities, whatever the collections may be, in order to facilitate these repositories, these cultural curation institutions and repositories, in reaching their linked but competing goals. Now, I know some of you have probably seen these slides before, and so forgive me on that. We're going to get to some new features, but I just want to give people a bit of a just quick introduction. This is where Sabina works, by the way, and it also is a motivation for this project. You know, every time I go to a museum, or in fact, when I went to Dublin, Scott and I were talking about Dublin a little bit ago, there's the Book of Kells, this beautiful book sitting in front of you, and you know, snake through this space and sometimes a line. You get there, and there's a piece of glass, and there's one page, and you get to see those two open pages, and that's it. The superpower that I wanted was to be able to put my hand through that glass and turn the page. And that's really what is intended here, is to give people the opportunity to use virtual reality, to be in a space that surrounds you, that is relevant to the reading of a particular book. Now, the particular book that we are starting with here is a book owned by USC. It's a book of hours, so a Christian devotional book, as you can see. It was owned by a woman, which I know thanks to Sabina, because she can read things like Old Middle Dutch or something like that, I'm not exactly sure, you know, for 500-year-old books. And she was able to place this book in its original location in Ghent, Belgium. And so this has an opportunity to take things which are separated from their original place and to bring them back, but also potentially to integrate the manuscript and its with aspects that are related to its contents, potentially. So imagine the Canterbury Tales, you might be on various places along the way of the pilgrimage in a particular environment, because the environments can, in theory, be changed. This one is just a simple, you know, church here. And you can see some of the functionality, including, you know, the ability to really look carefully and closely, and also efforts have been made in this Unity project. So it's basically a Unity project that is using a commercial plugin to simulate parchment. And we were very grateful to receive an NEH grant to support that. And then a second phase we are in right now in order to to do a number of things. First of all, to address universal design aspects. So you see here we've got Latin. Wonderful, if you happen to read Latin, and if you have really good eyesight, it's very small, to create designs that allow for people who have different sightedness, different cognitive capabilities, different color perceptions, different manipulating capabilities, and to put those into the project. The other thing, and I should have mentioned this, you know, in the two competing goals that these repositories typically have are, on the one hand, to make these accessible to people, but on the other hand, to really deliver on the social responsibility to preserve them. They're rare, they're special. And so here we hope that for people who may not be able to afford to go to Dublin, or go to South Africa, or go to Australia, or go to Connecticut, wherever, you, however, might be able to afford or access a headset where lots of these manuscripts could potentially come to you. Or you could also be a producer. One of the capabilities here is that the manuscript pages that you see are essentially, there's a bit of sleight of hand going on here, which I would really have to turn to Mats to ask him to describe with great clarity. But we have two-dimensional images that have been manipulated in various ways, and then they are placed onto essentially a mobile page, a page that has the ability to react to your motions and movements. And then each time you turn the page, you're adding a different two-dimensional image on it. The benefit there is that the many thousands upon thousands of scanned legacy images that exist in library collections now can be mobilized and placed into this kind of a project. And so we've actually downloaded images from the Yale Botanical Library and ploop, put them right in here in this very church. So that wasn't, it didn't take a ton of work compared to what it might have been if you had to actually rely on doing this as a custom project. The other things that we're doing right now are really trying to give people an opportunity to think into the manuscript. Most people can never touch a manuscript. Is this on a loop here? Hold on for a second. Okay, yeah, you guys are seeing the same thing twice. I'm going to pop open to another one. Different magnifying glass. We got tired of the other one. Yeah, the NEH was really thrilled about that. You do have specular capabilities here where you can see the gold actually change as you move your head, which is nice. Also, in speaking with curators, one of the things that they thought was valuable was to prompt a sense of the life history of the object itself. So the materiality of the thing that you have in virtual digital form. And one of the ways to do that, first of all, is to allow for the kind of close looking that Amy was speaking about in the beginning, but also to tend to how you care for it. And then secondly, to investigate aspects of the history of the object itself. Now this was a bright idea of Sabina's. I really like this, and that is that she noticed here that on this page you have that pattern in the upper corner there, and that's damage to the parchment from a small thin metal pilgrim badge that was pressed and adhered, kind of like a little press-on bookmark, or that could be sewn on to the page. That might have been collected by someone as they moved around in pious devotional acts of pilgrimage, for example. And so she's created a way to allow people to see a number of different pilgrim badges and to really look carefully and say, and try and fit them to the page to assess which one would fit here. So it's a bit of an interactive that we're experimenting with at the moment, in addition to giving people a translation in various languages. So this particular book has Latin, Spanish, and English, and you can cycle through it. Another thing that's going on is that the curators, in addition to suggesting that we interact with what had happened to the book and how it was used, that we encourage people to look at the book as as actually an artifact of its own history. And so here, the badge imprints, as I was just speaking about it, you get here now. Sorry, I didn't show you this before. But you can see over there on the left, those are 3 of the badges that you can pick up in virtual space, manipulate them, actually look at them and puzzle about them and learn something about them as you're investigating them. And then you can apply them to the space and see, do those holes line up? Would this actually fit? So for this particular book, that's the nature of the interactive that we've developed. I'm going to keep popping forward here. conservators and curators were also interested in having people really understand what happens to a book, how a book ages, about the book's history. And I hope you can see this here in this highlight. But if you notice here, this is brighter than it is over here. And so in a kind of bespoke manner, we have had students working with our project going into these images and selectively adjusting some of the features. Now, in this case, you're looking at the image of the dirt that has been taken off of that page. You can see it still maintains some of that folding of the parchment. There's another one here where you can see that the black, I don't know, maybe it's an iron-ish sort of degrading ink has been de-aged and restored so that people can interact with the manuscript and see that actually you can cause damage to this. And there are ways, and this is what it looked like when it was newer. So this is something which is fragile. And there we go. The restore mode takes away the dirt. The interactive mode with allows you to give something to the book. And in this, you also have the ability here to touch the front of the book itself and prompt the removal of dirt in live time, so in real time. I guess that's in real life and in real time. So here, this is a custom thing that you would do for any particular manuscript that you were working on. So it's not something that we would be giving to other people, the details. You would create this, or you would have someone who is an expert or someone who is exploring the book create these additions. And this is a manual process of changing the underlying page image in order that you can see these things, that you can provoke these as you're seeing. The other thing I mentioned earlier, briefly, is that these manuscripts can be investigated closely, but in very different ways in different sites. So you were just looking at it in a church, but in fact, it may have been read in one of these homes, these small residential units where the women in this women-only lay community, so it wasn't a convent apparently, but it was a women's community on the edge of Belgium, which are quite fantastically desirable now. And so, whereas we could call the priest, walk into the church, do our photogrammetry, and it was fantastic and wonderful and accessible, our NEH grant definitely did not cover both coding and buying into this. So what we actually did was use the good offices of a talented architecture student to model the space. Now I mention this because this kind of modeling, whether it's in SketchUp or actual architectural programs, whatever, is really accessible to people, and just as 360 panoramas are as well. And so this manuscript, if you want to see it, you can see it. This, I will tell you though, just to pull back the curtain a tiny bit, the architectural rendering programs do not transfer instantly and easily into some of the VR programs. There's a bit of work you might want to do. But if you're interested, we have one of our headset versions that shows you what it's like. And the idea here is to allow the simplicity of the actual context and the lighting that would have been experienced by this person as they read this book for private devotion to come into your experience. And potentially to allow for a place to be populated with things that also might have been placed there too. And as you see this picture of, this is Mary hearing that she's pregnant, the Annunciation, but it also gives us a window into a room, and that's an important feature for VR for this, and that is, yes, it is absolutely possible to read a manuscript in this room where I'm standing here with you, and I could be standing here and changing the page. It's also possible, and a different kind of experience, to be present and experiencing that presence of, an awfully big space with music that is appropriate to the space and time, or perhaps even ambient sound. And so, as distinct from the really creative AR projects, for example, like Booksnake, here you're brought away from where you are and into someplace else with a kind of focus and exploration that is distinctive. Because, not everyone is like this student here at USC who gets to actually sit with the book. And so we're hoping that there are going to be people around the world who are going to be, able to access this book, but either online in a 2D screen or ideally in 360, in an embodied experience of being there with it. So I'm going to stop now, and perhaps if you have questions of if it's art historical, has anything to do with medieval or early Renaissance, I'm punning it to Sabina. Unity details, tech like that. Thankfully, I have Matt's back here. And anyway, thank you very much.
So now we're going to get comments from some people who already know.
And I'm back with my paper to read. But again, engaged. Okay. So to begin, I can't take anything seriously, I'm so sorry. To begin, I want to thank Lynn and Sabina, and not apparently, other people, more collaborators, for sharing this project. I must admit I was a little nervous about generating a response to someone else's work when I first learned of that assignment. But after reading the project description, I was immediately excited, and I'm very passionate about the potential for XR projects in research, scholarship, and learning. And while I may know little to nothing about Renaissance era texts, this project got my synapses firing and led me to consider some of the decisions that were made and justifications for doing this kind of work. I'll begin with a short anecdote, and then I'll connect the dots between that experience and my reflection of this project. So I recently attended the Association for African American Museums conference in Nashville back in July, and had the opportunity to share an AR pop-up exhibition commemorating the 60th anniversary of the major civil rights events that occurred in 1963, so eloquently entitled the 1963 Project, that my Traveling Exhibits and Shared Collaborations Working Group developed as a demonstration of a digital curatorial project that could be replicated with free tools and minimal tech. We had the extreme pleasure of sharing this project with Medgar Evers' daughter, Rena Evers Everett, Malcolm X's daughter, Ilyasa Shabazz, and Huey Newton's widow, Frederica Newton. During our discussion, Ms. Shabazz asked us why an organization would be interested in XR tools. She mentioned an experience where she was able to see a lion or some other big cat roaming around in AR, but what contribution can these tools make to fight against white supremacy? So while anti-racism may not be a specific or at least primary goal for viewing 15th century devotional text in VR, the opportunity to examine fragile or restricted objects in an immersive context is applicable. The use of the magnifying glass to zoom into pages that have been handled in real life, the pop-up text indicating to be more gentle when turning the pages to acknowledge the fragility of the book and encourage proper handling, and the translations from Latin to English and Spanish, thus allowing for better comprehension of the text, are examples of ways VR creates an opportunity to engage with materials in ways that we cannot with the physical object. I believe XR is meant to enhance museum and library settings, and this project is a great demonstration of that challenge. The control panel on the right is really helpful to navigate through the translations, turn the pages without using the controller or hand tracking, and reset the space. The page pop-up on the left is helpful to get a better view of a clear, flat image. I'm not sure if there's a narration function for folks who are unable to read the text, but the environment itself is not particularly bright, there are no strobe effects, and the background music contributes to the immersive experience but is not essential for the user, so it's accessible for folks with impaired hearing. Additionally, this project was developed with 3 use cases in mind: research, teaching, and public outreach. Public outreach is the most precious use case for me in particular due to my own individual approach to scholarship and knowledge sharing. As a GLAM professional, non-university learning spaces with an accessible approach to education are essential for not only disseminating knowledge, but also cultivating it with audiences that operate outside of the academy. However, this is difficult with VR because most people do not own a headset, nor do they want to. It seems to me that VR headsets are still largely regarded and marketed as gaming devices, despite the increasing number of non-gaming immersive experiences available in VR, like hanging out at the International Space Station, which I did and was having a great time doing that. However, This is exactly where cultural heritage, public library, and community spaces can bridge the gap. These organizations are typically more embedded in their local community and have fewer barriers for entry, like walking through security, showing an ID, and indicating why you're visiting to justify your presence. Partnering with such an organization and bringing headsets for a program or loaning them to the institution gains faculty-led projects access to the public without starting from scratch to build those relationships. Regarding implications for research, this project called to mind an experience I had at the Digital Research in the Humanities and Art conference last week in Turin. Apparently, the largest collection of Egyptian objects outside of Cairo is housed in the Egyptian Museum located in Turin, but a major barrier for entry for Egyptian scholars working in Egypt is getting travel visas to Italy to come see the collection. The director led a major digitization effort of the museum's collection, which caused the number of theses and dissertations based on the collection to skyrocket over the course of a year. I can't remember if it was hundreds or thousands, but suffice to say it was a lot. It went from like 3 to 4 to whatever the number was. As researchers and scholars continue to develop projects to make archives and special collections immersive with little to no travel required, we may begin to see increasing scholarship from more varied perspectives on not only fragile and restricted objects, but also collections at institutions that are not easily accessible and beyond. I'd like to conclude with 3 key questions that come to mind for me when I approach VR projects and can be used as guideposts for projects like these that I think were demonstrated really well in this project. Number 1, is it accessible? Are there audio and visual cues that may require interventions for someone with impaired vision or hearing? Strobe or motion effects that may trigger sensitive users? Is the text narrated and the audio captioned? Number 2, how will the VR experience be adopted? Who's the target audience? How will they know about it? If they don't have a headset in their home, how will they be able to access one? And number 3, why VR? How is immersion enhancing the experience? Are there benefits to VR that don't exist in the physical space? So I just have 2 questions, and I feel like they're pretty simple questions. The first one is, have you done any testing with groups representing your target communities? If so, how did you approach integrating their feedback? And if not, what led to your decision not to do any testing, or are you planning to do it in the future?
Great question, and thank you for those comments. I really appreciate it. Nicely done. A lot to think about and appreciate. And testing is something that has been informally done by the team in our first session among our advisory board members. And we also have done it with a number of colleagues. And we were really looking for feedback from the point of view of expert users of manuscripts at the outset. We had construed our audiences in the initial, let's just see if we can make this work phase, which is partly what you're seeing in those videos, as other academics, people in curation institutions, folks who already had a reason for going to use manuscripts, and that's why even the training of how you properly handle a manuscript was included. Now, however, we went through the institutional review board process in order to assess not only getting targeted feedback from those folks, but to open it up a bit more broadly. We're staying with people who are over 18 right now, largely because of the simplicity of the process and because we are not to a point where we feel like we can get a really good feedback from a diverse audience of age and different abilities and different interests and origin, everything. And so I'm hoping that that is going to be in our kind of next phase. And it's a really important question because right now with implementing universal design ideas and principles, it's pretty, you saw it, you had your, hopefully you'll all get a chance to see it. There's some things that work really well and there's other things you're kind of like, oh, how's it work? So we're in a place, that's where we are right now.
Okay. And then my second question, you mentioned that this project is supposed to be replicable and scalable. How are you disseminating workflows, recommended tools, et cetera, to other institutions who might want to develop similar projects?
That is a fantastic question. And, I gave acknowledgement to, Sabina and to Adam Gilbert and to Matt. What I didn't mention was that there are really fantastic undergraduate students who are working with us. And I just forgot your question. Wow.
How are you getting all of
How are we getting the, okay. No, wait a minute.
So that folks can develop similar projects.
Thank you. And those smart undergraduates went through and they had the following assignment. Make it stupid proof so that I can do it. So that there's no way that I can screw it up if I follow your directions. That was actually what I asked them to do. And so there are extremely detailed, step by step by step, with lots of illustration manuals that are up online, along with all of the downloadable files. And some, some undergraduates from other institutions and some other folks have actually tried it. So it's out and available, but it's not something that people are going to want to bust down the doors at this stage to get, I think. But maybe in the future. Thank you for asking.
Let's open it up.
Am I supposed to? Yes. Okay, so Amy and then Mark.
Thanks so much for sharing. It's been exciting to see the Congress too, like see presentation to them.
You are very patient to go through these various iterations. Thank you for
No,
continuing to ask us to
It's
come.
actually really
And learn with everybody else.
I see about every 4 months, every time about this, like, oh my God, I can't believe they've done this now.
Yeah, I mean, just
We're fortunate to have really good people, so.
the being able to have that restored function now that we talk about how you communicate the fragility of an object in the library. And so I'm really interested in the kind of story I could tell, right? It's about how the immersive experience puts the user in a story. And it seems to me like your story is really about what like the research, right? So we're being asked to sort of look at the book in the way that I think some sort of researcher or scholar would look at it, right? A sense of like, you look at it, you look for degradation. It's the sense that actually we're looking at it from a 21st century perspective, right? What we would see now versus how it had been in the past, but we're looking at it, right, in the present very much. Right, even turning the pages, like that we need to do it carefully so it doesn't degenerate, means that we're looking at it, right, as someone who's looking at the object as a cultural object that's used for studying. And I'm wondering if you think about, and tell me if you get that right, it also as an object for prayer, devotion, because you put them in the space, right, of the church, which says it's about devotion. But I'm wondering if there's a way, like there's a mode that could come on or shift that's like actually for devotion, as opposed to sort of investigating it for like the smudges, the degradation, and like move the page, because I have imagined that, right, these books are used differently in like the system, this is not the right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fantastic observation. In fact, Sabina's colleagues investigate the life of prayer and what it does to these books. I mean, people cry, kiss, touch, caress, and so they most assuredly were used in a really lively, intense way by many people. Having that smaller room might provoke a greater sense of intimacy for the use of the book. Honestly, also, I have witnessed you really can change the book and you can change the environment. And so we got an ancient synagogue's schoolroom from the Ukraine, several hundreds of years old, and got from a colleague who had photographed really the oldest complete Hebrew Bible, the Leningrad Codex, and put these two together. So we have that experience as well. But what really surprised me was, yes, first of all, you're right. Researchers went crazy for this, because I walked into a kitchen in Princeton, and there were several professors sitting around, and they started looking at it, and one of them said, guys, go, because they were looking at it, they could see what this person was looking at in the headset. And so he's like, go look at that, lamed in the front of this particular line. They started collaborating on this text. But what he did before he kind of started reading it in that analytical way was he was chanting the Torah. And he was using it as he does, in synagogue. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, he's a professor. Well, I took it to New York, and I was showing it to a friend. And in a little, apartment 4th floor up, Gramercy Park. She's sitting at her kitchen table and she puts it on and she's like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then she opens up this ancient biblical text, 1,000 years old, and she starts chanting the Torah. And so it really did just completely transform her, reference to space and moment there. And so I think there probably are ways that this is going to manifest in people's lives, daily, regular, special lives, that we haven't really kind of explored very much. I look forward to that.
And I think VR allows so many different kinds of storytelling. It depends on what story you want to tell. So in this case, collaborating with manuscript creators, manuscript conservators, we designed the first experience that is for scholars, but also for people who don't have access to Latin, for example. So they will read the same prayers in Spanish or English. But in this phase, we started thinking about different kind of audiences. So if it was someone who had no idea what medieval manuscript is, what kind of story will we tell? Or maybe if it's a scholar who just doesn't want to go to Europe to travel and get access to the original, maybe they can study and work on the virtual model of the book from home without kind of avoiding everything else. So it's like, and then if it's a tool that we want to see used to teach students before they access special collections, for example, that would be a different story. And we would train these students before they access the original so that they won't damage the original. So it's like we are seeing now that there are different stories we could tell, there are different ways in which the experience can develop. And maybe we'll do them all, or we'll figure out what to do.
It is an interesting question, and that is, what actually will people resonate with in these ancient and rare manuscripts? And I have to say that, Sabina's at the Huntington, and they have the best copy of the Canterbury Tales. I mean, here's a pilgrimage text, going to Canterbury Cathedral. It's the bawdiest stuff you've ever seen. I don't know if you guys have read it lately, but, maybe seniors in high school. So, yeah, Lisa. Oh, sorry, Mark, we jumped over you.
This is kind of related to what Sabina just said, and Lynn, your story about the text and the reaction and the chanting of the Torah. How do I kind of push back on your target audience? Because, so I'm a scholar of the world's Columbian Exposition. I am already primed to squeal with delight at any primary object in any archive that, and I just, I'm over the moon. So I think where your key impact might be is not on expert manuscript users, but rather potential expert manuscript users, and really kind of priming them to understand, to get it. Sacred space, text, how it was used, ambience, and so on.
Well, that's a very helpful comment, and truthfully, there are ways in which we'll probably manifest these experiences ourselves as a team that has been involved in creating this template. We also hope that we'll make it straightforward enough and accessible enough and not so labor intensive that other people will be able to be intrigued by the possibilities for themselves or from something in their collection that they'll think, there are people like you who are going to want to experience this, that they'll also push those things out, perhaps. Because I don't have enough time in the world. I would love to. Mark, and then Mike.
So I had a sort of a similar reaction, which is I can see the use case for talk outreach. I think the use case for teaching is very obvious. And I think that I don't see exactly what a scholar would get out of this at the moment, which is to say that I work on visuals all the time, and you're taking a digital image that I already have access to and putting it in VR, which maybe makes me experience it in sort of a different sense, but I don't see how a scholar's going to fundamentally use it differently than just an image, unless you can do some sort of code ecology, right? Unless you can actually get the gatherings in the way that they were originally, or something where the VR experience has an added benefit to the scholar who's actually trying to understand, okay, which pages are you flipping back and forth to when you just open the Leningrad Codex? What's most likely to just open to? That's the kind of stuff that I think you really have space for added value for scholars. And I was wondering sort of if the project is going in that direction, or what you're thinking about sort of adding the codicology in, or if there's any paths to do that in the first place.
So that concern is, in fact, was the topic of an initial conversation we had with a programmer coder that we've just hired. We kind of sequestered most of our grant funding in order to have somebody really work on this issue of material simulation. And also, one of the things we talked about was having not just a page that can be turned in real time, but a page that actually reacts depending on its threading and tension, and so that it is very much more like a book, which many of you may know you have to actually hold open typically. And so that perhaps we could get at some of those possibilities, and so that when there's a notice, when somebody's scanning the book, if that is something that they're interested in, it could be captured and added into the virtual experience. We're not there yet, but it's kind of on the list of how might we do this.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of thing that real manuscript specialists are. That's sort of the final frontier, is actually getting a digital representation that's not just we unstitched the binding and laid it out flat, but we can actually reconstruct an actual book. A lot of which, at least at the value where I usually work, a lot of which are unbound, right? And so it's so wonderful to be able to sort of digitally rebind these things and actually experience that in a way that you just can't. I don't know.
That's an interesting idea.
It seems like that's the real value added for real manuscript scholars, right? And I mean, it's obviously an amazing project, and obviously the other use cases are very clear.
Yeah, there's someone, I don't remember his name, but I recently read one of his latest publications. He uses virtual reality to document all the idiosyncrasies of a page, or parchment page, and that's what he does. And so in that way, virtual reality, I don't know, is used in that specific way, with that specific purpose, and I think scholars can be very interested in that, in kind of, when you go to see the originals, you are there to touch parchment. It's like the thickness of the page is important to what you want to say about the book. So, but I think we're doing something different. I feel when I heard about that project, I felt that we are looking forward to engaging people and bringing them in, and letting people know that these books were not used where they are now. So the context of use has changed. The life of the book is still alive. It's like one of the pros of using virtual reality to document the condition of the page is that you see that these books keep getting older, older and older. And so it's like if we took the pictures today, or if we took the pictures of the Book of Hours in 2017 as we did, probably the original is already different. And so the idea is to document that change and that life, making our research transparent. So letting people know that they are not allowed to use the originals because we are worried to damage these artifacts. And whatever you do, even turning the page faster than what you are expected to do, is going to damage the book. It's going to damage the pigments or the golden leaf. So I feel like we are more, I don't know, I feel strongly about the idea of using VR to share our knowledge and to make the research transparent, more than using it to document the condition of the book, or using it to bring the scholars in. Because I'm sure I will never convince another specialist in medieval and Renaissance manuscript that VR is better than accessing the originals. But sometimes they cannot access the originals because the institutions consider that original fragile. So in that way, what would the scholar do? If they could have the virtual model of the book, maybe it would be helpful. it's like not all the manuscripts are accessible all the time. And so that's one of the reasons.
Maybe that's the answer. If you can't stay in Paris for a week, have steak frites for 2 days, take pictures, go home, and I mean, I think this is really helpful though to think about all of about the varieties of interests and needs as we are moving into this, honestly. So thank you for that, Michael.
I'm actually going to suggest you make your text harder to read. I'm very interested in.
I don't
the
think that's possible at this point.
The experience, historic experience of reading. One thing that really struck me, and again, the choices and tools are available to you in Unity, is playing with the lighting. So the lighting in these historic spaces in your VR is not historically how a 14th century person would have read. I've been stunned by how different Elmina looks if you turn out all the lights, you make it dark, and you just experience it by torchlight. So I would love to see these images with a candle, the light shed only by a candle, or just the light that would come in through the window on the desk in that sort of small personal room. So to both replicate the lighting conditions of the historic space, give it historic space you have the document, but in between there's another layer of and I'd be curious about, with the yellow light of a candle, if the yellow of a parchment actually kind of functions almost different, how the coloring of the illuminated manuscripts actually kind of pumps and is part of that ancient moment where it was being read, and that part is then lost when we have it laid it out on a dissection table in an archive for now. And if you're going to restore it to remove all that dirt damage and turn it into something new, well, there in that historic space, then that very bright new thing is appropriate because you rendered it in a clean original copy when that picture was young.
Yeah, this is a really a good attention to that kind of lighting as we go forward. It's going to be interesting to see if is it color or is it kind of texture. Yeah.
With candlelight versus your directional light that is the one.
That's a very good prompt. I appreciate it. So thank you all for those questions.